Hi, very good afternoon. A warm welcome to 19th World Education Summit, School Education from 23rd to 26th June. And this is our first day event, and we are live with our second panel with a much more interesting topic that is very much interesting right now in the current scenario, that is New Education Policy 2020 Approaches, Opportunities, and Challenges. To discuss and deliberate on this wonderful topic, we have wonderful esteemed speakers from the Pan India. So I would like to introduce our speaker. So first of all, our speaker is Mr. Anirudh Gupta, CEO, DCM Group of Schools, Punjab and Haryana. Welcome, Anirudh sir. Welcome to World Education Summit. Thank you for giving your precious
Thank you,
time.
Abhishek. Thank you. Pleasure.
And I would like to welcome Dr. Pratibha Kohli, Principal Maharaja Agrasen Model School, Pitampura from Delhi. Welcome, Kohli ma'am. Welcome to World Education Summit. Thank you for giving your precious time to us. I would like to welcome Ms. Sarika Babar, Principal Clara Global School from Pune. Welcome, Sarika ma'am. Welcome to the World Education Summit School Education. And I would like to welcome Mr. Harish Sanduja, Director School, Seth, Anandram, Jaipuria Group of Educational Institutions. Thank you, Harish sir, for giving your precious time to us. And I would like to welcome our speaker and moderator, Mr. Aditya Berlia, Joint Secretary, Apeejay Education Society. Thank you, Aditya sir. And I would like to request audience, if you have any question, please put on in the Q&A section. We will take it live. And I will hand over this session to Mr. Aditya Berlia to have a wonderful deliberation from this session. Over to Aditya sir.
Thank you so much, Abhishek ji, and thank you, Elets, for once again putting together such a wonderful panel to talk on this extremely important subject. The way we'll try to do, I have a wonderful panel, and I want to make sure that I can at least come back to them 3 times during this session. So we are going to structure this very simply. We are going to take up 3 leading questions, and I'm going to ask each panelist in the order that I can see them on my screen. If we can go through. My humble request to my panelists is to try to stick to about 1 to 2 minutes per question, very exact points, and so we can get a lot of depth and breadth both into our conversation today. For me, the first big thing to start off with, we are almost there to the anniversary of the new education policy, which had been declared in cabinet as our official country policy, which I have been a great supporter of. Of course, we had the 300+ page draft, then we had the 100-page draft, then the 60-page draft, then we finally, I think we got it down to 63 pages. And I highly encourage everyone who hasn't read it to please read it. I am still surprised how many leading educators, parents, students have not had a chance to read the entire policy, because it is truly game-changing and revolutionary. My question to my panelists, and again, just 1 or 2 minutes each. Now, since the NEP came out, there has we've gone through COVID, we've gone to the second wave as well. Where does it stand right now in terms of the implementation in your state or around you? And when do you see major action happening? Is this going to be something that will slowly happen over 4 to 5 years, or do you see in your states actual work happening on the ground? And I would love to start with Dr. Pratibha Kohli. Ma'am, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Aditya Berlia. What a wonderful start that the NEP has almost been through here for almost 1 year, and undoubtedly we have attended lots of sessions, we have conducted lots of sessions on NEP. So how far are we during the lockdown times with NEP? I must say that there are schools who are taking up NEP in online learning, because schools are closed all over India, and the schools are trying hard to get NEP into practice. Yet one can understand that to expect NEP to reach every nook and corner of India would be a big challenge. And I think universalization of access to education now is going to be a top priority when schools open. Further, equity and inclusion. These 2 topics are going to be very important because there are some children who are very good at online learning. There are some children who don't have access to online learning. So the basic issue of equity is going to be there whenever schools reopen, and hence getting children back to school once schools open, getting them into routine is going to be a major challenge with schools. Schools are working towards it, but there are schools where students don't have access to internet, and we may be lagging behind in our goals of NEP there.
Thank you, ma'am, for that wonderful and short answer. I think this is one of the biggest challenges during COVID-19. I think there are a lot of private schools and certain select government schools who have been going online. They've done curriculum refresh. But while the NEP is important, I think at this point, the fact that we are almost going to lose 2 years of learning for the vast majority of students in India, I think is a huge concern. And I'm very sad actually that we're not seeing a lot more of public action and demand on how to solve this. Thank you, ma'am. On to Sarika Babarji, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful question, Mr. Aditya, and I would like to tell here is that the NEP is going to be rolled out in phases, definitely, because as you said, it's a big 63-page document. It cannot be rolled out in a year or two. So here in Pune, in our school, how we have started is slowly and steadily. As you know, NEP emphasizes a lot on artificial intelligence and coding. So I think that's one step we can immediately implement, because with online classes, it's much easier, and we can implement it immediately this year itself. So that one thing we have started. Even a bold move of flipped classrooms. I don't know how many of you have heard about it, but the idea of flipped classrooms where students teach the teacher. Okay, so we give them some topics and they come prepared, they do research, because I think our students are becoming they're waiting for instructions to be given. They're not thinking on their own or doing anything on their own. They're just waiting for the instructions to follow them. So flipped classroom is something which will really, make them think, do research on their own, because data is so readily available. It will help them to, get knowledge on their own. Basically, how to learn is what we should prepare our students for. That's all.
Thank you so much, Jay. And I think that's a very nice point. If our schools, while we are going through the COVID, many of them closed, most of them on the private side, at least online. I mean, as we start implementing parts and parts of the NEP into the curriculum, going it in, I do see, I am a very greedy person when it comes to education reform. So while I do understand that you're right, it's probably going to take a phase-wise implementation. But my certain hope is that at least on the regulatory side, the government can push through things, hopefully by the end of this year. I'd love to bring Harish Sanduja ji on this, sir.
Thank you, Aditya. I think your question regarding how the implementation of this NEP is going to happen, I think I have been into understanding with the government about how the things are going to move here. So there is a foundational literacy and numeracy objective that the government wants to push. And they have a goal that foundational literacy and numeracy should be obtained or achieved at least to a certain extent by 2025, up till grade 3. And they are trying to put up different frameworks and operations in place, where by 2021, the states and union territories are likely to be having various surveys, starting from 2021 at the national level, then repeating it at 2023 and 2025. And similarly, what has started happening is that the government has started pushing the NCRT and the national curriculum framework accordingly, so that by 2022, the framework comes up into place. And then the State Council of Education Researchers would like to kind of frame it according to their requirements by 2023. So this is broadly what in the government level, as far as I know, is happening, and they are also trying to push in such a manner that uh, the four aspects of broad defining that they have done at the primary stages, and then the middle, and then the high school stages, those four aspects are also kept in place with fundamental learning and literacy and numeracy that is going to happen. So this is what I feel should happen, because the government seems to have started, and the schools will also, once the NCRT starts giving up the framework, will happen. I know for sure that CBSE has also started developing certain things in terms of curriculum at the senior levels, so that there is no hard separation happening, because from ninth to 12th, the once the NEP is launched fully, they don't want hard separation between, say, science, commerce, and humanities stream. So on that work, the CBSE has also started working, and I am hopeful that within next 3-4 years, we will see a drastic change in the ground reality.
Ajit, thank you so much. And it's a great point. India is a huge country at scale. To implement the NEP, I think it's really important for our leading agencies and regulators, CBSE, NCRT, and of course, the range of new regulators that have to be formed to quickly start ticking out expectations and policies that are there. I think only once those are out, the vast majority of schools will be able to adjust. In particular, under COVID-19, I think there's still a huge problem on coordination. Certainly, I know many government schools are really struggling at this point. Anirudh, please, your thoughts on what's happened in the NEP implementation, and welcome Serai ji. I think you just joined. Please go ahead, Anirudh.
Thank you, Aditya. NEP is no doubt a welcome step. Finally, the government has come up with some document after 34 years. So, you see, while the government is contemplating, Ministry of Education has already rolled out a document on the implementation of NEP. A lot of committees are being set in. So, I think it's a responsibility of all of us educators. Also, the government has its own agenda, but as edu leaders, we need to see that how do we implement it in our respective organizations, schools, colleges, and universities. As far as our organization is concerned, DCM Group of Schools is concerned, you see, I'm happy to share that most of the provisions of this national education policy had been implemented in letter and spirit in our organization long time back. Whether we talk about the teachers training, we have a separate department, which is for the last almost more than a decade involved in teachers training. When this lockdown was imposed on March 23, 2020, it took us just 4 days to switch over to a virtual platform. We ensured all the teachers, they under Bring Your Own Device BYOD project, that they all have a laptop or a tab or some smartphone 5 years ago. So 100% of our staff was IT literate. So what NEP is, laying emphasis and major stress on. So most of the aspects, whether I talk about the multidisciplinary approach, I talk about internships, STEM education, we have, devised our in-house, programs and even apps to ensure all these, whether we talk of artificial intelligence, we've created AI hubs in our schools. So everything, what NEP caters for or what NEP envisions. So whether it is, internship, our children are going for internship. Our children, I'm happy to share, we applied for 2 patents last year. Fine. So we know that, India is really lagging behind in terms of research. We have more number of doctorates than graduates in United States, but still our contribution to worldwide patent is less than 1%. So we have, right from class 6 onwards, there is a separate department, driving the children towards the research, innovation,
I fully
design
understood
thinking,
that.
coding. So all these aspects, they've been, like looked into, and almost, if I say, 60% of the NEP has been implemented, even the assessment and, bagless days. So
Yeah.
while the government is
Let
chartering out
me
their own
pause you
agenda.
there. I think wonderful to hear you as all the wonderful schools here and all are doing a great job in implementing this. How do you see this play out in the government schools?
Yeah, so it's going to be a huge challenge, Aditya. In terms of like the biggest challenge of the government, is accessibility. So in the government school, the government will have to, chip in a lot of resources. Make the entire bureaucracy involved in the entire delivery of education unlearn. We have to do away with red tapeism. We have to bring, rather than the senior IAS officers, we have to bring educationists, in those hot seats where the NEP has to be implemented. Otherwise, you see, any act, any policy is as good or bad in a way it is implemented. So I don't want that NEP should become a ripe act, which is right, right intention and poor execution. So the government will have to bring in major reforms first in its own, the structure of the delivery, its own governance model, and the government will have to work more on the grassroots level. So in case they want the NEP to be really implemented, in its own.
Thank you so much, Gupta. And I think you make a wonderful point there that that the policy is only good as the implementation. Welcome in, Serai ji. We're just going through 1 or 2 minutes for each panelist before we dive in more. Your 1-2 minute quick thoughts on we've had the NEP
Wonderful. Thank you, Aditya.
Coming up. We're all worried about the implementation, particularly under COVID. Our previous panelists have talked about how schools are trying to implement it themselves. We've had a very small amount of discussions on the struggles of online learning with schools which have not been able to camp out. Taking from Gupta ji's last statement here, where do you see the implementation happening from a regulatory side? Where do you see are the major risks in this implementation? Because a lot of the state governments, for example, haven't even passed the necessary laws to create the new departments.
Right. Well, it's a wonderful question, of course, and it's an honor to be a part of such a panel. So it's like just answering your question, like in a brief. Various states have started the implementation of the NEP, but then there are roadblocks that we are facing right now as well. Even in the states in the north as well, we've spoken to the various state education departments, and they've come up with a plan to implement the NEP. But the problem lies in the problem doesn't lie in terms of the implementation. I think the problem lies in terms of the transparency and the communication to the various states. Now the Indian education system in India is, of course, it's like, as you all know, there's a concurrent education system where we got the state and then we also got the center. So I think the lack of communication between the states and the center is the biggest roadblock as towards the implementation of the NEP in the states. Like, if we've got broad guidelines given by the center should work in sync with the states. There are various states that aren't on board. Now, if you've the issue about mother tongue was a very big issue in certain states in the south. So I think it's important to consider all of the viewpoints and come up with a common policy. I think that's where most of the implementation issues are being faced. And of course, given the fact that we've just come out of the second wave and we possibly might enter the third wave of COVID. I think COVID itself has thrown most of the policies that we've had in place out of the window in the last 1 year. So we've obviously got to keep in mind the current pandemic that we are facing if we want to move forward with the NEP.
Thank you so much, Saiji. For the next round of discussions, we've all now had multiple NEP workshops, conferences. We have been involved in all of this. I think everybody here at least has been to 10, 15 of them, at least that I remember, that I've seen so many wonderful faces. Everyone here is from a private school or a private school background here. One of the big, and I think we've exhausted to death the talk about private schools, because every media story, everything we talk about ends up revolving on what are private schools doing, what are private schools fees, what are private schools regulatory, what is NEP private schools. And that's understandable, since the vast majority of the middle class and the upper middle class, which actually reads, let's say, the English language media, really attends all our workshops, ends up being there. But I want all of us here to take a step back. Let's ignore private schools. I mean, private schools are supposed to be a luxury item in any country. They have become a necessity in India because of the lack of investment in education. Different states are trying to change that. Many are claiming successes. So what I want to really talk about in this next round is, how do you think the NEP, one or two major things that it does, that will fundamentally impact the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of students in India who don't have access to a private education, who can't afford it? And we have, and just for our audience, as all of you know, we have a whole gamut of ultra luxury private schools to small NGO foundations there. But once you remove them, what you get is a large number of government schools all across the country. And during COVID-19, they've really struggled. They haven't been able to really go on virtual learning. There have been some wonderful exceptions, I have to admit, very well done by a few schools in a few pockets of excellence. But the vast majority are going to lose out about 2 years of learning. And we aren't seeing any, there is no protest. There is no thing. If you saw what happened in the US or other countries, there was a well of protest from the entire population and citizenship, that why isn't the government doing something about our government schools? Why can't we open? How will we make up? So again, starting in the same order, Dr. Pratibha, where do you see the NEP transforming the government education system, particularly for those who are very vulnerable? You start out about the inclusion and equity requirements. So I would love to start with you.
Yeah. So, Aditya ji, you are so right that as a country, education in schools, it is at extreme levels. So there are schools where almost every child would have a Wi-Fi connection at home, and every child would have computing devices. So that is one extreme. And the other extreme is where children don't have access to computers and Wi-Fi, and they will be really struggling for education. So it's so important to bridge this digital divide. So what the lockdown times have brought to us is a new term which is called digital divide, where our students in India are divided due to the access of digital devices that they have. Now, a lot of onus, I would say, lies with the government, because the education is the responsibility of the state, education is the responsibility of the center, and we need to really think, if we cannot provide computing devices or computers or Wi-Fi to each child, then probably broadcast programs over radio, over television, so that en masse students attend such programs. And it's very important that educationists talk about competency-based education, because ultimately those children who are not going to school for, say, about 2 years get a learning gap. Now that learning gap needs to be addressed, and we have to think and have a vision for the next, let's say, 5 or 10 years, when these children will be a part of the workforce, but they will be lacking the skills that will be required in the workforce. So actually, there needs to be a lot of focus on education. And I would say here that there's a lot of talk on competency-based education, which identifies the skills of students, and then children progress on those skills, and ultimately they become a part of the workforce of the country, and they contribute towards the economy of the country. So when we talk of NEP, let's not focus only up to class 12. We need to work with a vision that these students will complete class 12, they will go to college, then they would require jobs, and whatever learning gaps the pandemic has caused. We need to get equity and inclusion in our schools, in our curriculum, so that they are prepared not for the present, but they need to be prepared for the future. And one more thing I would like to add is that digital literacy is the most important aspect. We are living in the age of information technology. So each child needs to be digitally literate so that he or she can learn not today, not now, but tomorrow and in the future too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji. And I love that. Of course, you mentioned the digital divide. We've all seen that happening, even in private schools, where you have a selection of students who are unable to really start participating. And I know everybody here has gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure that they are in. But we've had governments in India try to dump laptops all across the country, one laptop per child, one iPad per child, one notebook per child type of policies. They didn't really work in the past. And I think Pratibha ji makes a very important point. I think just giving technology to people is not just going to help. There has to be a competency framework that has to accompany it to really have the kind of change that we actually need. Going off to Sarika ji. Sarika ji, again, same big question. How does the NEP help the actual masses, the actual students who are all across the country, not just those who are privileged to send their kids to private schools, because the private schools will respond to the market, they will figure it out, they will regulate it out. But what are the opportunities for government schools to transform education in our country?
As we all know, Aditya, that the government school, the quality of education in government schools in India specifically is not up to the mark. We have been struggling to raise the bar over there. So I am here basically. See, I run a rural school, a school in rural area as well. And as ma'am said, that bridging this 2 years of gap is really a challenge even for me. So I really want answers from experts here, how we can bridge that gap. I have no answer to this because I have struggled in the past 1.5 year for my rural school. Though I send multiple videos, multiple Zoom recorded sessions, everything was shared in my rural school, but still it didn't reach the masses. Hardly 20-30% could really benefit from those videos. So I'm also looking for answers, how to bridge that gap of 1.5 years of learning.
I think that's going to be a big question, and I think one of the sad parts is that we're not seeing enough of a public debate on this. Yes, it's very nice that everybody here stepped up and they had like full virtual schools, and we can all talk about our great accomplishments on that. But Sarika ji is being super honest. They are parts of our student population who has probably got a little bit left behind. And what does that mean for the rest of the country? What does 2 years of mislearning look like? How does that impact jobs? How does that impact development? Will we 10-20 years from now call it a lost generation, where that 2 years becomes 3-4 because they're unable to go through the competency framework? How do our regulators, particularly those who are looking at measuring learning at certain gatekeeper modes, will deal with it? Will they give exemptions or flags or something? And I think we really worry about the entire country when it comes to this. But I'd like to go back to one topic of NEP. Harish, how do you see NEP truly helping and impacting government schools and government education in this country? Let's ignore the private sector for once. Harish, you're on mute.
I feel that NEP is definitely going to help the government schools because for the first time, the government has very categorically stated that in the foundational years, because they have specified 4 stages: the foundational, the preparatory stage, the middle age group, and then the high school. So in the foundational, they have very categorically stated that they want that the speed of reading of the children has to be kind of documented, and the children should be asked to read properly. And they have given a benchmark figure also there that the children should be tested for 35 words per minute by class 2. So the reading speeds are supposed to be like that. Now, what has happened is that if the children are not able to read fast enough, then the human brain has this ability to forget things because it erases a lot of information by itself. So what happens is that if the reading speed is slow, then by the time the child reaches the end of the sentence, the child would have forgotten how the sentence began. And therefore, it becomes extremely important for a child to end the sentence in a very short span of time so that the child can make a sense out of that sentence. So small initiatives like this are very well documented in NEP. And in the foundation stages, they are talking about activity-based learning this time. And the focus similarly on the preparatory stage is the play-based learning. In the foundation and the preparatory both, they are talking about that the teachers should be single, and they should, when I say single teachers, means in a class there has to be one teacher who is responsible for all the subjects. Because the subject teacher introduction they are bringing into the whole system by class 5, the middle school, where different books of each subject would be there, and at the same time they would also introduce vocational and skill training there in certain subjects. And of course in the senior stages they are talking about focus and in-depth critical thinking and flexibility into the whole system. Now, keeping into mind this framework which is being proposed, I strongly believe that because this is skill-based and they are essentially talking about learning to learn, I think we are on the cusp where we will be able to see a large amount of change in next few years because of these fundamental shifts that are going to happen into the system, where we will try to have our entire learning outcomes being measured. So when learning outcomes will start getting measured properly, I see that the children in the government schools are definitely going to get benefited because of this.
Actually, I love what you start out with, right? Fundamentally, what you're looking at is a complete rejigging of how we look at early childhood education and how it connects into higher classes, right? And I think that complete reconnect, particularly adding almost a year and a half of early childhood education and formally bringing it into the system, will start to make a huge difference because we've seen from all the data across the world that early childhood education and its transition is one of the critical phrases that can really change how education is done. But I want to bring in Gupta ji on one important thing, sir. One of the interesting things that the NEP does, it says that private schools and public schools have to follow the exact same standards. There are a lot of states in the country, and I can speak from experience. I won't tell which state, but 10 years ago I walked in and was having a meeting with the Secretary of Education, and at that time I was part of a Chamber of Commerce, and we said, sir, we would like to adopt a school. Each member would like to adopt a school, and can you give us a list of schools and what their needs are? And the person said, well, we have all the data, every single information, everything you want to know about every private school in our state, but we have no clue what's happening with with our own government schools because we've never bothered. Our focus is to make sure that the private schools are regulated, fees, this, but our standards for our government schools are the government schools, right? Gupta ji, do you see having a single agency that sets up the same standard for both government and private schools? Is it going to elevate government schools, or will they have to dumb down the standards for private schools?
Yeah, Aditya, we have almost 1.4 million schools in India. out of which 25% schools are private schools, which cater to almost 40% of the school student population in India. And you are right, we have schools, we have such diversity in schools. We have schools ranging from a school which is operating out of 4 rooms to a plus schools, in 40 acres. And we have government schools, we have schools being run by the trust, municipalities, NGOs, corporate houses. So there's a lot of diversity. I don't see a level playing field in a near future. And already, talking about the government policies, they are a little lopsided, towards the private educational enterprise. Fine. So coming to this implementation of NEP in the government schools, you see, one is the academic aspect, which Mr. Harish was talking about. Then there's a administrative aspect. Fine. If we look at the data, this year itself, 21-22, the budget allocation to the Ministry of Education has been cut down. Fine. So this year, it was allocated 93,000 CR to implement NEP and the other aspects of education. So if the NEP has to be implemented in the government schools, the way it has to be or it should be, we need almost 2.5 lakh crore per year. Fine, which is almost 6% of the GDP. At the moment, almost 3.5% of the GDP is being spent on education. So that way, the government has to be very, very open-minded in terms of the budgetary allocation for the education, and particularly for the implementation of the NEP. And you see, as I was saying, the aspect of the government, I remember when the RTE was implemented in India, I was talking to Mr. Kapil Sibal, who was Minister for HRD. I asked him that. I said, sir, I think the RTE will adversely affect the quality of education in India. He said, right now our focus is on quantity. Quality can wait. Fine. So the government focus is different, but of course, as you said, if the government opens up to the public-private partnership, if the good organization, the corporate houses are roped in, because I do not see the government spending 6.5% of GDP. As such, due to Corona, there's a lot of economic slowdown, and the government does not seem to be in a position to spend that kind of a money. However, if I talk about my state, Punjab, which has ranked number 1 in terms of rankings issued by Ministry of Education this year, I see a lot of work being done because education is a concurrent list. The implementation, the entire scope, the diversity, the budget, everything differs from state to state. In Punjab, you can increase the fee by 8%. Haryana, you can increase it by 10%. So in Punjab, the government is distributing the smartphones to all the students. The government is, rolling out a lot of plans, and which, has kept, it on the, pedestal very high in the ranking this year. In fact, the Punjab has topped. So it's not difficult. It needs a lot of good intention. We need to do away with red tapeism, as I was talking about. And as far as the level playing field, you talk about the CBSE affiliation. There are schools, government schools also, which are CBSE affiliated, which are ICSE affiliated. Do you think all the norms of CBSE or NCRT or all these, regulatory boards are being followed in the government schools? It's not possible. It's high and difficult for them. So there has to be a major, administrative restructuring which has to take place, right from the, availability of the right kind of finances to the government opening up, seeking help from the private sector, as it has been done in aviation, transport, hospitality, health. So in education sector, the government has to really, come up with some out of the box strategy if the government really wants, the education to improve across the spectrum. That is my take on it.
Serai ji, taking from Gupta ji's thing, what would be your out-of-the-box strategy for the government?
Right, well, I haven't got one yet. Like you'll be the first one to know if I've got one. But but there's some wonderful points that Anirudh just raised as well. I would like to just point to a study by Eric A. Hanushek in the early 2000s, where he said that there are two different areas that that the ministries of education focus on. One is school attainment, which is an increase in the number of schools, and the second is quality. So as Anirudh just said right now, that Kapil Sibal said that the focus was on the latter and not the former. Sorry, the focus was on the former and not the latter. There's this study that just goes to show that an increase in the number of schools doesn't actually lead to an improvement in the student performance. Eventually, the ultimate aim of education for any country is to improve the performance of the students, because that's how for the quality of life will eventually improve. Because it goes on to say that if a student scores better marks in, let's say, math and science, and then the student will get a better job, and so on and so forth. So that's how real economic growth is driven, via education. So I think the focus of the Indian government over the last few decades has been the growth in the number of schools. Now, this is also based on one other study by Babar, Michael Babar, that goes on to say that India currently lies in the poor to fair category of education systems. We have to go from poor to fair, from good to great to excellent. Actually, there's a long road in front of us. I think it's going to take a lot of time, but the focus needs to be on the growth of the schools, of course, and the focus obviously needs to be on what we are educating our students about. So we've got the infra, we've got the classrooms, we've got the buildings, we've got the grounds. What is actually going on inside the classrooms is what matters the most. So there are various ways in which it can, of course, be done. I think that a lot of the speakers have shared this point as well. But it's very important to focus within the classroom rather than just making more and more classrooms. Secondly, we have seen that there's via the NEP, I think there's a budget allocation for education of 6% within the next few years, and we currently haven't even reached even 5% yet. What should be done, and this is one of the out of the box strategies that I might have in place, is that let's get the private sector much more involved. That will make much more sense rather than the government spending on government schools, which hasn't worked out for India over the last few decades. Let's promote private investment in India. If we want to attain a gross enrollment ratio of 50% within the next 15 years, as per the NEP, and if we want to bring back around 2 to 3 million students back into the Indian education system, that translates to roughly 1 university and 50 schools being open for the next 15 years. It's impossible to do that with a budget allocation of 6%. The budget allocation will have to increase to around 10 to 12%, which cannot be done. So let's promote the private players. Let's not regulate them. Let's allow them to function the way they are. We can take cues from various education systems in different parts of the world. If you look at the US, Chile, we can even come up with a voucher system where the government sponsors the education of students in the private sector, not the way it's being done under the RTE Act, which is just in name, and which very, very few of us have received the reimbursement for years yet. But let's come up with a strategy which promotes the private investment and doesn't regulate them as much, and makes life easier for us to function. So apologies from taking you from the government to the private sector, but I think it's very important that we have to focus on that. Yeah.
And I love what both Gupta and Serai said, and even back to when we started with our Dr. Pratibha's point on inclusion. India last 2018, India still had 126,000. That's 1.2 lakh zero schools. And zero schools are schools where they have a full school infrastructure built, but zero students, zero teachers. And this is where the focus on quantity has led us. Massive number of school buildings, massive infrastructure, massive things. On one hand, completely empty, lying there, and on the other hand, where is our progress? We're seeing our gross enrollment ratios declining. We are seeing major issues, and certainly these 2 years are going to be a massive wake-up call. But I'm going to now focus just in the last 30 minutes. Let's bring it back to private schools. All across the world during the pandemic, governments have recognized the intrinsic role of private schools and keeping private schools going. In the US has given $500 million or $1 billion, that's almost 3,000 to 6,000 crores of funding to private schools. Governments like the UAE stepped in day one to really support private schools, help them with technology, help them with their finances. All across the world, across Europe and major places, is the government said, look, we understand that private schools play an intrinsic role in doing this, and we are going to give them grants, we're going to give them funding, we're going to really support them through this time. I won't go into a matter of politics here on this, but I can see very few private schools in this environment who feel genuinely and fully supported by the government there. All of us sort of have looked at that, look, maybe in the next 5 years, at least the government may not even have the money to really implement the NEP all across the country. I mean, certainly we are going to see a budget shrinkage. Certainly we are going to see an increase in tax terrorism. Certainly we are going to see a struggle to really look at every part of our society which is going to need funding from the government and support. As our last question, what can the government do to change its approach to private education to really help supercharge the NEP? The NEP itself, in its initial drafts, went a lot further in terms of really giving private schools freedom, flexibility, and openness. I think due to political considerations, by the time it reached the policy, a lot of those were watered down. But how do you see a future in which the government can either step aside or support a massive increase in private investment, particularly into education, that can truly bring up the quality of education, not just the quantity? Starting with you again, Dr. Pratibha.
Yeah. Thank you so much. A very thought-intriguing question, I would say. We have to consider education not as a matter of 14 or 15 years of schooling. So the problem is that the government considers education as 14 or 15 years of schooling, whereas education is preparation for life. So I don't think there is an argument that we need to spend or think less or more about education. It's all about that the foundation we give to the students in school prepares them for life. So giving more thought to education, having a vision that we are not preparing our students only for exams, only for 14 or 15 years of schooling. Rather, when we educate a child, we prepare a student for life. That type of mindset, that type of focus among individuals and in the government is imperative for growth of education. Now, per se, private education, where I must say that most of the schools that are on private lands or run by private bodies, they have been contributing immensely to the cause of education in our country. And the way they have been giving quality education, undoubtedly it is the best education and the best minds the private schools have created. And I really hope, I am very positive that once we are out of this lockdown and pandemic, the government will enhance focus, enhance spending on school education, because that is the foundation for our country and that is the foundation for any society. So change of mindset, that education is not for 14 or 15 years. Education is a lifelong preparation for success. That type of mindset and focus can only take the country forward. And I really hope the government thinks on those lines.
Thank you.
You are on mute.
I apologize. game-changing things that the government can do to supercharge a private education to truly try to implement NEP all across the country?
Sorry, sir, come again, please.
Game-changing things that the government can do
Okay.
to supercharge private implementation of NEP, particularly since it seems post-COVID, the government budgets won't be up to par.
Right. So, sir, as one of our panelists just said that private schools occupy almost 25% of the school count that in India right now. So, and it is because of the quality that they provide. That's the reason we have certain standards maintained even in India. So, what I want to say here is government should definitely give private school some sort of freedom to implement various evaluation methodologies, various teaching methodologies. Okay, so for example, I would like to give here a form of blended learning, which is which is evolving right now, a form of blended learning from Finland and from Japan, combining grade 1 and grade 2 students together, or combining grade 3, 4, 5 students together. These sorts of reforms can really help private schools improve the standards more. And even the evaluation methods need to be changed. Because teachers now, if you see, are under tremendous stress. Completion of syllabus, completion of syllabus, completion of syllabus. And because of that, the standard of teaching, there is a rush to complete the syllabus, so students are really not learning. So if we change the exam pattern, with NEP 2020, if we can, really think and change the examination pattern, not to teach from exam point of view, but to teach from learning outcome point of view. If that freedom can be given, we can really make a difference.
Thank you, Sangaji. Harish ji, same question. Harish ji, you're on mute.
I have very strong opinions about it, and I strongly feel that the government should step back in terms of what it does for the private schools, because many a times it looks like that the government is singling out the school systems, whereas the entire education system in India is the preschools, the schools, then there are universities, then there are colleges, there are edtech education centers, then there are tutorial centers. So this completes the entire diaspora of education in India. But all the rulings that come are coming only for a very small segment that is called private schools. And in fact, to an extent that if you see that 25 to 27% of private schools are there in India, and 47% of students go to private school in India. And it is quite important that the government doesn't seem to be defining what is profiteering, but it keeps on saying that there is something called profiteering. But what do you say? What do you mean by profiteering? So I think the biggest help that the government can do is that if it can define that this will be called as profiteering, because as it is, there is a very, very watertight compartment there, that you can't have more than 15% rolling on to into the next session and all those things. So those things are already there in the educational setups. But if the government really wants to give some breather to the private education entities, which it has to, then only there will be a good system coming in, because you need to see what happened in the telecom industry when there was only the government players, and when the private players came in, so it has benefited almost everyone. Similarly, if you see the aircraft industry and the airspace industry, you will see that when only Indian Airlines was there, there was no freedom to people. But now it has brought down the cost down also, and has given so much of competition. So I think the government should look seriously at it, give more freedom to the private entities, and change its approach, because it needs to define certain things very well. And once those are defined, I think it can really help the education system, and it will bring NEP to the actual outcome that we want it to go to. But if we don't do that, I think we are bound to go into either a very sluggish direction, and we may end up fighting only with the education system and the private schools, which the government seems to be kind of doing right now.
Harish, I love this idea. Einstein's theory of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. If you want to really implement NEP and saying it's a game changer, you can't do the same targeting and extortion of private schools that happen every day all across the country and expect a sudden boom in the quality of education. Gupta ji, please, your thoughts.
Yeah,
What can the government do to
Aditya,
supercharge?
you see, in India, we are the largest education setup in the world. If we see the children going to private schools, the average ratio all over the world is less than 10%. But if we add India, it jumps to 14%. So what is required at the government level is to bring a mindset change. Government has to, stop giving stepmotherly treatment to the private segment. Find the government has to open up. If we see the amount being spent on the child studying in government schools, it's close to 4,000 rupees per child per month, being spent on a child going to government school. Whereas I feel that more than 80% of schools in India, they must be charging less than that. Fine. So one thing, one solution is the direct benefit transfer. Like, on the lines of, effort being done in some other areas, if the government can directly transfer, say, around a voucher of 2,000 or 3,000 rupees per month, which is Aadhaar linked, directly in the account of the parents below the, belonging to the economically weaker section. So let it be a choice of the parent, whether the parent wants to go to a government school or a private school. Fine. So DBT is the answer to all the whatever problems we are talking about. Number two, as you rightly mentioned, the private school education system in India has become over-regulated. Fine. So the government has to, as I said, open up. The schools need to self-regulate themselves. Schools need to be themselves conscious of what is right and what is wrong. The government should not, intervene beyond a, certain point of time. And if the, like I have seen and there are reports, in the media that so many of private schools are closing down. And, all the people, they become shy of investing in school education. Fine. So how do we achieve the target of, bring the 2 crore student, out of the ambit of the school system back into it? So the government has to come up with a policy which is, equally, supporting government schools and a private school. The Minister of Education is not the minister only for the government schools. So if there are more private schools coming up, if there are more people, ready to invest in education, there'll be a good, healthy competition. The fee will come out, and the parents should have the option of choosing whichever school, they think, whatever parameters they think, whether it's closest to their home or it is providing good quality of sports or music or fine arts. So it should be the sweet will of a parent, and for which the government has to, DBT is the, as I said, the only answer. And if there are more schools, more investment, automatically, we talk about NEP or we talk about, quality education. And if we think that education has to be a growth engine of any economy, and we being a developing nation, if we want to be in a league of developed nation, then education is the only solution, for which the government
Thank
has
you,
to
Gupta
really
ji.
open up. The government has to allow the FDI into the education segment. The government has to, allow, if not 100%, autonomous, systems have to be put in place. So it's not that the government schools are cheaper, they are coming at the cost of taxpayers' money. Whereas in the private education, the entrepreneur, the trustee, the people who set up, they're investing their own hard-earned money. So there should be no discrimination. The DBT should be brought into the education. It should be opened up. It should be, the government should at least acknowledge the importance and the contribution of private segment. The private entrepreneurs. In the school education in India. So it's all about
Gupta ji,
mindset
thank
change,
you.
and I can see it
Sorry,
coming.
we're a little bit out of time, but I fully take your point. And this DBT is a very interesting option. It's work for other sectors. Why not for education? Serai ji, the last word. We've just about hit our time.
Aditya, right. So, Anirudh and plus the rest of the panelists have raised some very interesting points. As I said in the last round of questions as well, the voucher system should obviously, I think, I think it's definitely something that we can look at. Like if you look at other countries as well, even Chile, their vouchers system was based on the US voucher system, which in turn was based on the Dutch voucher system. Milton Friedman was one of the few economists in the 50s who particularly spoke about the voucher system and the benefits for a country's for a country's growth, of course, based on that. The major point about the voucher system is that even if the DEBT is done, there should still be an option for the parents to choose the school that they want their child to go to. So if that can be done along with the voucher system, I think that itself can be a wonderful policy for the Ministry of Education to look at. But of course, since we know that budgets are going to shrink over the next few years because of COVID, so this looks highly unlikely. But potentially in the next 10 to 15 years, I think that's. If we can have a shift in the policy towards that, that is just one point. Secondly, I think it's time to stop. I think it's time for the Indian education system and of course the various regulators to stop hiding behind the smoke screen of promoting capitalism. We have to understand it takes a huge investment, a humongous investment to open a brand new school from scratch in India. Like the investment apart from your land acquisition would roughly cost anywhere between 2 to 5 CR, and if you add the land acquisition cost as well, then you got an astronomical figure of around 10 to 15 CR for the first 3 to 5 years. It's evident that the private players have to be a part of this, and if they are,
I fully agree with you. I'm sorry, I've just been told we're out of time. And I would have loved to see Serai complete, because the next question from that is, if costs are so high, and apart from the people who do this out of the goodness of their hearts, how are we going to really fund this? The government doesn't have money, and I would be the proudest if our Prime Minister steps up and says that and our Finance Minister steps up and says we want to bring in $20 billion of FDI in education. But if they say they want to bring $20 billion of FDI into education, they have to make sure that those people make some money. They don't have to profiteer, but they have to make some minimum amount of money to make it worth it. And I think that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody. Abhishek, over to you, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And we have a major list of questions, sir. So I will send all these questions on email. So if it seems worthy, you can revert me on that, sir. I send all the speakers of the panel. And I would like to request Aman to please share the token of appreciation from the World Education Summit side. So this is a small token of appreciation for World Education Summit side to Mr. Aditya Berlia, Joint Secretary, Mr. Apeejay Education Society. Thank you, Aditya, sir, for giving your precious time to World Education Summit. And speaker certificate is presented to Mr. Anirudh Gupta, CEO, DCM Group of Schools, Punjab and Haryana. Thank you, Anirudh, sir. Thank you very much for giving your precious time to World Education Summit and enlightening us with the wonderful deliberations. To Dr. Pratibha Kohli, Principal, Maharaja Agrasen Model School, Pitampura, Delhi. Thank you, Pratibha, ma'am. Thank you very much for giving your precious time to us. To speaker certificate is presented to Mr. Harish Sanduja, Director, Schools, Seth Anandram, Jaipuria Group of Educational Institutes. Thank you, Harish, sir. Thank you for this wonderful deliberation and enlightening us, all our audience. And Ms. Sarika Babar, Principal, Clara Global School, Pune. Thank you, Sarika, ma'am. Thank you very much for giving your time to this World Education Summit. So, and to last speaker certificate presented to Mr. Reekrit, Managing Director, Satluj Group of Schools, Punjab and J&K. Thank you, Reekrit, sir. Thank you very much for giving your time to World Education Summit. And I would like to request all my audience, if you have any other question, you can follow all our speakers on their social handles as well. They are pretty much active on their social handles. So please ask some genuine query. If you have any query, please put on their social handles. They will get back to you. So by this, we will wrap this session. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sabhi ko namaskar. Thank you very much.